Hi. January 5th, 2026. Boy, that'll take a little heat news too, huh? How many times people are going to miswrite that one? Um, I don't know, maybe I need to come up with a tag phrase or something. I don't know why that just popped in my head, but it did. So it'll probably be kind of like a random thought one, I guess. Maybe I don't know. Yeah, it will be. Stream of consciousness, kind of whatnot. Uh, Talking with a friend of mine yesterday about victim mentality or lack mindset. And like most of us, they've had a series of, how do I want to say this? Um, Not so fortunate experiences when it comes to relationships, um, both romantic and otherwise, as we all have. You know, something I'm very fond of saying, and I've been saying for many, many years, is that unfortunately, a lot of people, and I'm guilty of this too, we have a tendency to fall in love with the potential of a situation and not the reality. And unfortunately, most people, and I think I was talking a little bit about this yesterday, we have these different personas. We have a personification of who we think we are, who we feel we are, but then there's the persona of who we present to the world. And then there's the personification of who we think other people think we are. Um, Point being is, people oftentimes will put, their best foot forward. And that in itself is not a bad thing. The issue comes into play when they stop doing that because that's not who they are at their natural state or their rest state. They're no longer trying to impress or woo or chase or win you over or whatever. They're no longer feeding your ego, essentially, validating your insecurities. The problem with that is this: when you fall in love with the potential and not the reality, you, well, even if you fall in love with reality, we always set people, we set expectations on certain things. And when those expectations aren't met, of course, we feel slighted and hurt and disrespected and, a slew of victim mentality, essentially. Why me? What did I do wrong? Yada, yada, yada. And we all do it. I'm guilty of it too. I still struggle with it. You know, I don't know if it's something you can completely break out of. I strive to, but it's difficult. You know, I'm much, much better than I used to be. I will give you that. There are a lot of curveballs life has thrown at me in the last year that I've just kind of rolled with. And while I had moments of, you know, oh no, I lost my tail, Captain Eeyore syndrome, I got over it pretty quick. It's a saying I read sometime last year. Instead of saying "why me," why don't you say "try me"? You but anyway, we were talking about that, and they were going on about how, oh, I don't really think I have a victim mentality and all this other stuff, and they've recently gotten into a particular AI tool that they're utilizing. Excuse me. lack of throat chakra there. Anyway, that they're utilizing to analyze their journal entries and previous writings and poems and stuff that they've written over the last several decades. Good stuff. Can be a very useful tool. It's very good at summarizing and paraphrasing certain things, depending upon what you're asking it to summarize and look for. It's going to spit that out. That's how most AI tools work. A lot of people think AI is this super magical thing, and really it's just a fancier interface to a dumb computer. And yes, computers are actually dumb. And when I say that, I mean it in the aspect of they will essentially put out exactly what you ask them to put out. They're very literal. Okay. And yes, I'm saying this as a person who worked in the IT industry and can program in 7 different computer languages and has worked at a game company and all kinds of other shit for, over 25 years. It's not what I do currently, but it is what I did for a very long time in my life. So yes, I do understand how they work very intimately, as well as most of the AI that's out there. It's not the point. The point is, so this person went ahead and decided to feed in the question of, does the writer or author of these works essentially display any victim mentality? And basically what it spit out was, yeah, absolutely. And it even went on to say how in the type of kind of victim mentality they have, how there's this kind of weird opposition between self-blame and credit, which causes essentially emotional instability and so forth and so on. Which the funny part about that was these are things that we've discussed numerous times over the last year and a half, me and this particular person. Granted, did I put forth those ideas as succinctly and as coherently as the AI tools did? No, I did not. And that's where it's good. It helps to weed through the verbose fodder, as it were. Word salad. So that was an interesting conversation. But the whole point is that victim mentality or lack mindset is comes out in many subtle ways and in ways that people wouldn't obviously expect. Most people think they hear victim mentality and they think somebody who walks around you know blaming everything on something that happened to them in their life, constantly looking for pity and for me, and nothing is ever their fault. And while that is absolutely true, that is a very external display of that particular mentality. It also has a lot of little subtleties. One of the examples I presented to them is, for example, say you're working a job and you're getting by, but you're not really getting ahead, and you're constantly worried about, am I going to have enough money to pay the bills? Am I going to do this? Am I going to do that? And it gives you this constant state of anxiety or dread. And the interesting part about that is the way energy and manifestation work is, if you're constantly thinking about that, that's all you're constantly bringing into reality. And what I mean by that is, no, you're not necessarily, poof, magic Merlin and manifesting these situations, although it can get into that, and we'll talk about that some other time. But what you are doing is you're training yourself to only see that, to only see the lack side of it, to only see that I don't have enough. I have to work harder. I'm oh my God, I'm dreading this, and blah 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 blah. You're just reinforcing that same programming over and over. over, and I've talked about this so many times on this channel. You know, the subconscious mind seeks to validate itself. It's very malleable. It can be reprogrammed very easily. And once you change that perception to where I don't have enough, and change it to where, okay, I'm going to stop worrying about having enough and start focusing on, you know what, I'll be able to handle it when the time comes. Start with just that. And eventually you can shift it into, no, I do have enough, and abundance flows to me, and you will, it will completely change your perception, and you will look at things differently, and therefore you will change your reality. You know, and I can't remember what the statistic is, but it's something like, you know, life is only 10 or 20% of what actually happens to you, and the other 80% is how you perceive it, how you handle it, how you react to it, or not react to it for that matter. You know, and that's what it means by you making create your own reality. You do, because a vast majority of your reality is right here. It's all in the mind. You know, very mysterious, powerful organ of gray matter we have up here in this skull. You know, and that's the other thing. Think about it. Your brain actually has no contact with the outside world. None. No physical contact at all. As a matter of fact, the brain doesn't even have pain nerve endings or feeling nerve endings like the rest of your body does. That's why you can cut somebody's head open, them still be alive, and you can sit there and poke the motherfucker and they won't feel it. Because there's no, those nerve endings aren't in the brain. There's no need for it. Think about it. It lives in a completely isolated dark cave, and the only input it has is from external organs that pump in information. An interesting concept, that the fact that you actually technically always live in the past. It takes a certain number of nanoseconds for the optical information, the photons, to register in the back of your eyeball, to create an electrical signal to travel along the optic nerve to the back of the head, because that's where the optics is stored, and then to be processed by the brain. By the time that happens, that exact moment you were just witnessing, it's gone. It's gone. It's gone. It's gone. So how do you change your reality? You change what you notice, you change what you perceive, you change how you react to the outside stimulus. Because the brain creates the reality with limited information it has. It's absolutely fascinating. It really is. I was talking to another friend of mine, my good friend, came back. So proud of him. And, you know, just as I've said before, addiction is progressive and so is recovery. And I can already see, you know, he's starting to get settled in. His nerves are starting to calm down a little. Takes a few days, a couple of weeks really, to kind of get back into the habit of recovery and working towards a life in sobriety. And there were certain issues that he was dealing with in the past that he never quite healed properly, and that's kind of what tripped him up and sent him back out. And he's aware of those now, which is good because now he can address them. But then, you know, another particular issue came up, and this happens to a lot of addicts, and it has to do with our friends and family, our close loved ones, our inner circle, the people that we have inadvertently and sometimes even intentionally hurt in our path of suffrage, or our downward spiral of self-destruction, as it were. And in his particular case, there's an interesting dynamic between him and his mother. I have a similar dynamic, although the outcome or manifestation of this dynamic is different for me than it is for him. With him, there's a quite a bit of blame game going on. Um, she has a bad tendency of constantly dragging up the past and throwing it in his face and all this other stuff. And I was listening to him when we were talking about this and everything. One of the breakthroughs we had was that he's very much like his father. I mean, like similar to me, very, not just physically in appearance, but in attitude, mannerisms, all of that stuff. It's another interesting side note, we spend so much of time in our lives trying to rebel against our parents, and then we end up like them. It's yeah. Say, needless to say, the universe definitely has a sense of irony and a sense of humor in that regard. Anyway, one of the ideas I presented to him, because as an addict, we get a little bit of sobriety time under us and everything, and we feel better. We feel actually more like ourselves that we know we are, that internal personification. Um, it's a struggle for us because we don't understand how, even though our friends and family might see those changes in us, they don't trust them. That's part of the problem. The other part of the problem is, unfortunately, most of those people have never had any kind of closure or release or outlet for the anger and resentments that they've built up towards not just us personally, but towards our actions and our choices. They've been hurt, they've felt slight. So a lot of times they end up lashing out on us, or they will, in extreme cases, not try to knock us back down. I don't think it's something they do intentionally. I think it's just that they're still hurting, and there's something they haven't received to heal that wound. In his particular case, it goes a little deeper in the aspect that his father died years ago, drank himself to death, and so him and I were talking about that and talking about how, in some ways, it appears, at least from an outside perspective looking in, that his mother probably still has some of those same fears with him, has some abandonment fears and issues regarding the fact that his father died, and he has since then started down a very similar path. Um, so this was a pretty big breakthrough for him. It obviously was a lot more detailed than all of that, but I'm not going to put his story out on a public platform without his permission. Um, in my particular case, it was a similar situation, except it went the other way. It turned into a very strange codependent relationship. Just as he is in some ways a replacement for his father towards his mother, I am in some ways a replacement to my mother for my father, who passed about 10 years ago as well. I have done a lot of work to break that cycle, and I believe I have to an extent. Um, but it took me a long time to recognize it. It really did. And the interesting part is, you end up in these situations and whatnot, and it's funny when you can start to identify particular patterns like that. And I don't necessarily mean just, I'm not saying go out there and label everything. And it takes a lot of introspection and reflection and whatnot to get to the point to be able to say, yes, this is this kind of relationship. And even that, not everything is going to follow a cookie cutter book definition. Rarely does it. Usually it's a mix of a lot of different things. But it's funny how you get into these dynamics. And if you're not very consciously aware of the dynamic and you're not making intentions to change it, how easily it is to just fall into that autopilot mode, which just perpetuates the cycle. And it's true with everything in life. It really is. Why do I always seem to take it back to not only addiction recovery? Well, obviously, because that's where I'm at in my life, and that's something I've spent a lot of time in my life learning, having been in and out of active addiction for 20 years, probably even longer than that if I think about it. We'll just say hardcore addiction. But as humans, we are very social creatures, um, and you are going to have interactions with people of all types throughout your entire life. It is not healthy to live in complete, total isolation and hermit mode. I've tried. It's not real good. That's not to say don't have healthy boundaries. That's not what I'm saying. Um, Obviously, you need those. Which leads me to another topic. If you're going to establish a healthy boundary with somebody, that's fine. Establish it. Tell them about it. Tell them how they crossed the boundary. At that point, if they continue, then you can take a more severe reaction. Just ghosting people, that is not a healthy way to handle that situation. As a matter of fact, it's very toxic. It shows a tremendous amount of emotional immaturity. It's one thing to stand up for yourself. I get it. It's one thing if you're being bullied or harassed or abused, but it's something else entirely to just be like, no, I'm not going to deal with it. That's not really showing any kind of emotional maturity. Now if you go to this person, you say, hey, look, I don't like when you do this or say this or whatever. I don't like this particular behavior, blah, 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 blah. I need to, establish this for my own well being. And they continue to do it, yeah. Oh, by all means, cut them off. Absolutely. And I mean, I'm just speaking, this is my personal preference. I can't sit here and tell anyone what to do, and nor am I attempting to. So, just in my own personal experience, it's cruel. I don't know where that came from. Okay, I have to chew on that one for a little bit, huh? Anyway, uh, hear with the mind, listen with the heart, and feel with the soul.